How's it going, and welcome back to their Pokemon Unite video here on YouTube. We had a pretty large balance patch somewhat recently. A number of characters were buffed and nerfed, in addition to the nerfing of both Score Shield and Buddy Barrier as held items. Things have had time to shake out. I've played a bunch, I've watched a bunch of people play, and I've got an updated tier list here. Things to note for people that haven't watched one of my tier list videos before: I think it's really important to acknowledge when you're making a tier list that solo queues slash duos slash trios play out incredibly different than coordinated competitive 5-stacks do. So this tier list video is going to be broken up into 3 parts. The first is I'm going to be rating all of the characters in the context of playing generally a full solo playstyle. The second is I'm going to break down characters inside of the competitive 5-stack metagame like we saw at the Aeos Cup Finals this past weekend. And finally, I'm going to kind of culminate all of my opinions between those 2 tier lists into, hey, what characters do I think are perfectly well balanced right now? Which ones would I nerf? Which ones would I buff, and why? So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive on into our solo queue tier list here today. So first things first, I rate characters in solo queue higher if they are able to carry a game. The big difference between solo queue and coordinated 5-stacks is that in solo queue, you're not always going to be able to depend on your teammates. So characters like Greninja, Cinderace, Venusaur, Blastoise, things that can have really strong team fights even if all of your teammates aren't there, or if they're not pressing their buttons in an ideal combination. You can pick the game up on your back if you play these characters well and run it down across the finish line. As we head down into the A tier of this list, the first 5 characters in the A tier are ones that I think are all pretty good inside of solo queue because they all have good objective securing potential. Being able to get that last hit on a Dreadnought or a Zapdos, despite whatever else the rest of your team might be doing, can definitely be the difference between your team winning and losing the game. So all characters that have a pretty reasonable objective secure on top of also playing in path well. All of these characters path particularly well, I think are very reasonable choices for solo queue. Charizard is probably the only character inside of this A tier that does not contest last hits in top or bottom path well. That being said, if you can play Charizard in that central area, that jungler role, it can definitely pick a game up and carry it on its back inside of team fights. Charizard has one of the best Unite moves in the game if you can manage to not grab an unstoppable person and get it canceled. So definitely a really powerful character inside of engages. The rest of these characters, Hoopa, Ninetales, Pikachu, these are characters that all path top or bottom, contesting last hits incredibly well early. They can also bully opposing Pokemon if you're paired with another character that's pretty strong in lane early. Machamp last hits relatively well in lane early with Karate Chop, and then its Unite move is just so impactful in those team fights. If you can tag 2 or 3 people, you can generally flip an engagement on its head all on your own. As we head down into the B tier, these characters are all kind of powerful in their own right in different ways, but they have some particular issues. For example, Zarina is very good inside of path early, with the exception of she's pretty rancid into any of these 3 characters down here. They'll be able to bully her well, so depending on your path, you can have a really good early path with her, but that's not always the case. Decidueye, especially with Spirit Shackle, is similar to these first 5 characters here in that it gives you really good objective secure. That being said, Decidueye does not have fantastic mobility, so if the opposing team has a lot of things like, say, Gengar or Lucario or Zarina, things that can dive on top of you and delete you very quickly, Decidueye can have a bad time. Gengar and Absol, similar things. These are characters that have very good matchups into particularly squishy characters, especially a number of these ones up here in S tier. You delete things like Greninja and Cinderace and Decidueye and Gardevoir, but you have a medium matchup into things that are thicker, like Blastoise, Venusaur, and other defenders in the game. So these characters can be really matchup dependent in how they play out. Trevenant was a character that got a buff in the most recent patch, and I think the curse build on Trevenant especially is pretty reasonable inside solo queue. You can just last hits on farm particularly well. You can buy a lot of time with Trevenant inside of an engagement if your team is out of position, giving them time to catch up to you. One character that I've moved up here that I want to address from previous tier lists is Crustle. I think is one that'll raise a couple of eyebrows being up here in B tier, but specifically in the most recent patch, they added the ability to critical hit back to Crustle's X Scissor and its Stealth Rocks, and I've been playing the critical hit build of Crustle in solo queue a good bit and actually winning a good deal with it. It feels like a character that when you're playing the crit hit build specifically, you can actually carry games in a lot of instances in a way that's a lot of fun. It's also reasonable at securing objectives because of all the little last hits. So if you're wondering about this Crustle rating, be sure to check out the highlight video for that. It's a good time. These characters down here, Zeraora, Cramorant, and Azumarill. These are all characters that they're damage-based characters that can kind of carry team fights if you're over-leveled on the opposing team, but overall, I just think all three of these characters are just on the weaker side. Their numbers aren't quite good enough. Their kit needs a boost in some way, and compared to any of the other damage-dealing characters on the roster, I think they're just a cut below. The rest of these characters, defenders and supports that aren't Hoopa and aren't like damage-based defenders like Greedent and Blastoise that can scale up and get big hits. I think these characters can be really good inside of solo queue, especially inside of duos and trios, with the asterisk that in order to play any of these 6 characters and have your game be good, you have to have a damage carry Pokemon that you can depend on, and that's not always going to be the case. So if you're with, a Cinderace or a Greninja or a Blastoise who's superb, all of these characters can have a great game. The problem is you're going to get games where your carries just aren't farming enough wild Pokemon or aren't in the right spot, and you can be, the best Blissey or the best Snorlax in the world, but if you don't have someone to peel for and support, none of that's really going to matter, unfortunately. Moving along, we've got our 5-stack tier list here based on largely what I watched over this past weekend at the Aeos Cup Finals, as well as watching lots of Team Scrim. I've got an S plus tier for the first time, and that's Hoopa. Literally every 5-stack in the Aeos Cup Finals had a Hoopa on their team. Absolutely no exceptions. The entire competitive metagame is warped around this character's Unite move, and the portals are back since they nerfed Trick. The character just does something that no other character can do, and if you're not including it in your composition, you're basically griefing. Yeah, Hoopa is something else. These S-tier characters were present on almost every team this weekend, and most importantly, they were present on the teams that were winning more than they were losing. Blastoise saw play in the central area as well as in the defender and attacker role in the bottom slot. Lucario dominated as the most popular character to take that solo top role, and then Blissey was actually played in the defender role in the bottom path on a lot of teams. Character looked really impressive in a lot of the engages over the weekend. In the A tier, big upgrade from the last time we played it is one of the teams in the EU that won, and then the team that won NA as well. They figured out that an early push top with Sylveon only taking a single buff out of the central area was really advantageous to get the opposing team's top laner behind. So Sylveon won both NA and EU with the Hyper Voice build, doing this early one buff and then push. So I think it deserves its A slot after being in compositions that won both of those tournaments in kind of a split central area configuration. Greedent saw probably the second most play in the top path after Lucario. Definitely a reasonable and competitive Pokemon if your top laner is familiar with it. Trevenant saw play in the defender role bottom, and then notably Gaming Gladiators has been playing Trevenant in the solo top role with the Curse plus Hornleech moveset. Really neat innovation there with this character getting buffs and seems definitely competitive in a couple of slots. Similarly, Aegislash, character that popped up in a couple slots depending on which team you were looking at it. It sees play in the central area, but it also sees play in that solo top role to reasonable effect. Greninja and Cinderace both saw varying amounts of play as central area Pokemon over the weekend, although they were less present than other things like Blastoise that I have up here in the S tier. Venusaur saw some amount of play inside of 2 different roles. It definitely saw some in the central area, but also in that attacker role bottom. As we get down to the B tier, these were characters that saw some amounts of play in teams that were making okay-ish runs into the tournament, but didn't really see play in teams that had top finishes or across multiple teams. So Machamp and Zarina, both small amount of solo top play. Gengar, Charizard, Talonflame, these were characters that all saw varying amounts of play in the central area to varying degrees of success. Pikachu and Ninetales, these saw play in the attacker role in the bottom slot. Eldegoss, Wigglytuff, Slowbro, these were things that saw play in the defender slot in the bottom, sometimes over where that Blissey was. There's also a team notably that was playing a triple support bottom with Hoopa, Blissey, and Eldegoss to go all in on protecting their Venusaur center. The characters in the C tier and the D tier were ones that like maybe saw play, but they were replaced in the following games. They were just kind of like meme picks or not every game picks for the teams that played them. Like there was one team that played an Azumarill solo top for one of their matches and they actually won it, but they didn't play it in the following match, instead choosing to go back to Lucario. I believe it was the more powerful pick. So overall, I think this format is pretty competitively diverse. Outside of the fact that every team has Hoopa, there were a lot of the Pokemon Unite roster that saw play on one team or another in the biggest tournament we've had for the game so far, which was really awesome to see. Now, let's put all of that together, my thoughts from the solo queue list, my thoughts from the 5-stack list, and let's talk about what I would change. Before I get into the details of what I would change and why, I think it's important to understand that game design context is king, and when you make changes to some characters, it will also impact other characters, making something worse. For example, if you make Lucario a bit worse, it not only makes all of the other top path options better, but it also makes characters that Lucario is good at diving, such as Decidueye and Gardevoir, incidentally a bit better because one of the characters that naturally preys on them has been made worse. Let's start at the top of it. Hoopa is Pokemon Unite's current problem child. I would love to see, honestly, a rework of its Unite move. I think the fact that Hoopa lets you kind of just pull people in from all over the map is just really obnoxious. I feel like it probably shouldn't be able to teleport your entire team and be this incredible attacker that provides CCs. So maybe you make it so only one person can walk through the portal, or you make it so everybody can walk through, but you don't go into this unbound state. There's a lot of different things they could do with Hoopa's kit, but I think it's a very obvious problem, especially looking at the 5-stack competitive format, that Hoopa needs some kind of change so it's not you play Hoopa or you're at an incredible disadvantage. Lucario's just been the best top path character for forever. One of the things that was actually kind of interesting is the most recent balance patch technically nerfed Lucario's E-speed, but incidentally, because this patch also nerfed Buddy Barrier, basically every character in the game got squishier. So Lucario's power level as a whole, I think, actually went up in this last patch, which goes back to that context is key. Even though Lucario's numbers came down, other numbers came down as well, which made Lucario's power overall go up. Blissey's just a powerhouse. I'm going to be honest, I feel like maybe this character was just slept on. I definitely hadn't rated it super highly, but so many teams in the side of the competitive 5-stack metagame played this character to such fantastic success that I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the current format that we're in now continues to develop, if Blissey becomes a similar to Hoopa kind of S+ tier, you play this or you're behind in its current state. I've got Blastoise at the very front of the just right because I think there could be an argument for, hey, maybe Blastoise deserves a small nerf, but I also think it's probably worth waiting to see if the format can naturally correct to Blastoise being one of the more commonly played characters. I think there's a chance that that's possible, so I don't think I would touch Blastoise just yet, but that's something definitely to keep in the back of the mind. Similarly, I've got Mamoswine at the bottom end of the just right category, and I think there could be an argument to putting Mamoswine in the small buff category. That being said, I think a lot of Mamoswine's current problem, especially in the 5-stack metagame, is that Mamoswine in particular lines up pretty poorly into Blissey being omnipresent. Blissey giving things unstoppable makes Mamoswine's kit significantly worse compared to a lot of the other defenders. I think there's a good chance that if you make Blissey a little bit less omnipresent among top teams, Mamoswine gets a bit better. The small buff category, all of these characters are like kind of middling inside a solo queue, don't really see any competitive 5-stack play, and they're all deserving of at least some type of numbers bump up somewhere in their kits. And then finally, Zeraora. I feel like I'm going to be ringing the Zeraora needs buff bell until it's long dead and forgotten about. But again, my poor cat demon or whatever this thing's supposed to be down here. Only Pokemon in the client that doesn't get its Unite move until level 10. Please, Pokemon Unite balance gods, give my Zeraora a big buff. I think the character is fun to play. I think Discharge and so their skill sets are sweet, but it's just so understated. Getting your skills at 6 and 8 and 10, and then your upgrades at 12 and 14 is just so gosh awful slow compared to everything else that's going on in the patch right now. So, what do you think of my tier list? What do you think of my thoughts of things that I would like to see changed and why? Let me know in the comments down below, things you think I missed on. If you agree with everything, that's great. You can smash that like button and leave a comment anyways, letting me know you think I nailed it. Feel free to share the video with a friend if you think it was on point or if you think they just need to yell at me for my opinions. And we'll see you again tomorrow with another Pokemon Unite gameplay highlight. As always, folks, thanks for watching. Appreciate you.